So now Trump, rather than being intimidated by their refusal to accept his election, or rather than get his feelings hurt, Trump doubles down, triples down. Every time they hit him, he hits back with additional energy and verve. And I'm telling you, this promise with an executive order to end birthright citizenship is huge. And it's why he was elected. When things are going terribly wrong, and they are in our country right now, when things are terribly wrong and out of control, you have to have somebody willing to go outside the so-called boundaries. And Trump's doing it every day and willing to do so, because this is what pushing back, this is what defiance, this is what changing what the left is doing looks like. It was never going to be pretty. It was never going to be quiet. It was never going to be clean. It requires a strong stomach and strong fortitude. And I don't think any elected Republican other than Trump, even if they had made the promises Trump made, I think all of them would have caved by now. But Trump hasn't. He doubles down. All right, I'm going to issue an executive order. I'm going to end birthright citizenship. Let me read to you the 14th Amendment, how it begins. All persons. Now, the 14th Amendment goes back to I think it was ratified by Congress in 1866. No, it was passed by Congress, ratified by the states 2 years later. So 1866, it was passed by Congress and ratified by the states in 1868. And its original intent was to grant citizenship to slaves and their descendants. And it was part and parcel of post-Civil War era of America fixing itself. It was a good thing. Our Constitution was written so that mistakes at the founding could be corrected. The vast majority of people knew slavery at the founding was untenable, but they needed the Union in order to fight the Revolutionary War. They needed the southern states. They needed unity to do that, so they had to accept slavery, but they built in safeguards to wipe it out. It happened in 1868. The 14th Amendment, it begins this way. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the U.S. and of the state wherein they reside. It was clearly intended to be referring to slaves and their descendants. The parts that birthright citizenship freaks have to delete are naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. You are not naturalized and you are not subject to the U.S. jurisdiction if you're here illegally. You cannot be. You're under some other country's jurisdiction. If you're here illegally, you cannot possibly be naturalized. Well, the birthright citizenship crowd, which wants to water down American culture and destroy Western civilization, conveniently leaves out naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So your born here child absolutely is not a citizen. This is what Trump is saying. Trump is finally pushing back against an assumption that has been made because it was the least path of resistance, if you will. But now it's make or break time. As my friend McCarthy says, you need somebody to break the furniture. Sometimes you're going to remodel a house. I got to take a quick time out, a little long here. Next segment's going to be so short. A little bit more background on the 14th Amendment here, because it's going to be relevant as the issue goes forward. Again, it was added after the Civil War. Its purpose was to overrule the Dred Scott decision, which was a horrible... Dred Scott sanctioned slavery. Roger Taney was the Chief Justice, forever immortalized in infamy. It held that black slaves were not citizens. So Congress got into gear and passed the 14th Amendment. It guaranteed that freed slaves would have all the privileges of citizenship by providing, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside, which means the drafters of the 14th Amendment had no intention of conferring citizenship on the children of aliens who happen to be born here. In fact, the very author of the Citizenship Clause, Senator Jacob Howard of Michigan, expressly said, this is why the original intent of founding documents is so important. Quote, this, meaning the 14th Amendment, this will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, who are aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers. It was expressly intended to confer citizenship to slaves and their descendants. There was an 1884 case, Elk versus Wilkins. Supreme Court ruled the 14th Amendment did not even confer citizenship on Native Americans because they were subject to tribal jurisdiction, not U.S. jurisdiction. Well, an illegal alien here is not subject to U.S. jurisdiction. They're under the jurisdiction of where they came from if they're here illegally. Guess when this all changed? In the 1960s, concomitant with Senator Kennedy wanting to reopen. We had shut down all immigration from 21 to 65. Along comes Senator Kennedy in the pre-Chappaquiddick days, wanting to reopen it for the express purpose of making sure the Democrat Party always had a permanent underclass of voters dependent on them and the government.
You're listening to...
And it's one of the force multipliers, geometric proportion advancement in terms of the numbers of illegal immigrants. So the left is saying that Trump is just doing this to rile up the base. It's just an issue for 1 week before the election, that he doesn't really intend to do it, that it can't be done, that he doesn't have the power constitutionally to do it, because it is a constitutional amendment and he cannot just reverse it. But he does have the power on the basis of what we just talked about. The actual wording, what is illegal now is the way it's been adapted. Trump does have, according to constitutional people who I admire, say that all Trump is doing here is enforcing the Constitution and the 14th Amendment as it is written, and that therefore Trump's position is perfectly legitimate. You even going to look at the words that were written by one of the authors of the 14th Amendment, and just to repeat, his name was Senator Jacob Howard of Michigan. This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers. So it's perfectly clear what the original intent of the amendment was, to grant citizenship to slaves and their descendants. So you can expect that the left will find an activist court somewhere, a judge, to say Trump can't do it. He'll stay the imposition and put it on hold, and then say Congress has to do something about this. Congress has to change the amendment. The president can't. Same thing they did to George Bush on military commissions, and it's the same thing that they did on Trump's travel ban and so forth. But still, despite all that, I think it's smart to make it an issue. The left can sit out there and wring its hands over, oh my God, Trump is just trying to rile up his base. It's called winning an election. We've gotten to a dangerous point here where the left refuses to accept election outcomes. And folks, that cannot lead to anything good. That has always been the glue that's held us together. I have, at times, I've marveled that this country is held together the way it has for as many years as it has, given the only thing that really holds us all together is a piece of paper or a series of pieces of paper, the U.S. Constitution. The honor system and the reverence, the respect for that document is what's held us together. In all of our years, we have never elected a despot or a tyrant who wanted to literally rip it up, throw it away, and establish his own tyrannical dictatorship. It's amazing. But we're getting dangerously close to the same thing happening when one of our political parties refuses to accept election results for whatever reason. They make it up, well, it was stolen, the Russians, this or that. It doesn't matter. When they refuse to accept, it means that there really isn't any unity around the premise of our country. And we may not unify issue to issue to issue, but we always have been unified about the premise of America as founded. That's what's under assault today. And that is what is, in my mind, profoundly dangerous. And we are raising, and have been since the 70s, generation after generation of students who have been taught things that have nothing in common with the founding of the country. We have not taught children. You go back to the days when we learned that in junior high intramural football and softball that nobody won, that there were no outs. In a baseball, just no kid ever struck out. The kid hit until he hit the ball, put it in play. There were no losers. There were no winners. Outcome-based education, 2 + 2 was 5 if you thought it was 5. We weren't going to humiliate people who were wrong. The people who were really smart in school, we're going to slow them down. We're not going to service their superior ability to learn. We're going to slow them down so as not to offend anybody else. And we've now gotten to this point where kids have been raised coddled. They have been taught phony notions of self-esteem. Self-esteem today does not derive from achievement and accomplishment. It derives from I have a right to have self-esteem. Parents have been teaching little kids, you're perfect little Johnny, you're perfect little Susie, and they're not prepared for adversity. And so when nobody has been raised to deal with adversity, which in this case is losing an election, we have temper tantrums, we have childlike snowflake behavior on college campuses, and we have a political party that's behind all of this. And right now it's rooted in the failure to accept the results of an election that is ongoing. And now on Twitter, as I said, you can find posts, Hollywood people promising that there will be blood if the Democrats do not win the House back. There will be blood. So people are being threatened, not directly, but in a generic sense. All of it is designed to limit turnout. I think it's having the exact opposite impact on people. I think the left and the drive-by media continue to misunderstand who Democrats are, who Trump voters are, why they are Trump voters, and why they aren't going anywhere. And back to the phones we go. This is Dan in Manchester, Connecticut. Welcome, sir. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Rush. I wanted to thank you for telling people about the true intent of Section 1 in Amendment 14, because I've been trying to do the same thing for years, and people are under the misimpression that it simply means if a child born to illegal aliens in this country automatically becomes an American citizen.
Well, you can't blame them. It's been the case since the 60s, and we're dealing with mass ill education that's taken place on a lot of things in this country. That's why it's so important that we've got a president willing to push back on it. Because this is causing a discussion of it. This is how it happens. I've told everybody that this is what pushing back is going to look like. So,
well, you were talking about Dred Scott as a reason why the 14th Amendment was ratified, which was actually on July 9th, 1868, but another reason why it was ratified is because it goes back to the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. Well, the southern states weren't going to accept that, so they passed laws or codes that were so restrictive to blacks that essentially made them slaves once again, and they were called the Black Codes. So then Congress said, okay, you want to play that game, then we're going to formally recognize former slaves as citizens, which will make them subject to all the privileges and immunities to the citizens in the several states per Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1. So after that, those black codes were abolished, and that's why we have the 14th Amendment. And matter of fact, the guy who's considered the founding father to the 14th Amendment was a representative by the name of John Bingham from Ohio, and he made some remarks about the 14th Amendment a few years later, and you can find that in House Report number 22, dated 1871, January 30th. So it all explains how this joint committee passed the 14th Amendment. So President Trump, with all due respect to him, he wouldn't not be ending birthright citizenship because it never happened. He would be upholding the U.S. Constitution.
Well, that's the point. That is exactly the point that I made, is why he should do this. And that's his point. People have looked into this, may have found different rationale than you did. But the point is, if you look at the original intent of people who were involved in writing the 14th Amendment, all Trump is doing is enforcing the Constitution and taking it back to its original intent. The 14th Amendment was never intended to confer citizenship on people here illegally or the sons and daughters of ambassadors or foreign agents. It was expressly written to confer citizenship on slaves. And now it has been expanded. And again, that you can trace it back to the 1960s when this began, which coincides with the Democrat Party wanting to reopen immigration. You know, I still run into people who do not believe me when I tell them that as a nation, we suspended for the most part. I mean, there's always been people being granted citizenship, but we suspended mass immigration from the mid-1920s to the mid-60s for the express reason of allowing all of those who had immigrated starting in the late 1800s all the way through the 1920s to assimilate. That's what immigration was. People were coming here to become Americans, and they wanted to be Americans. They didn't have to give up their birthright. They didn't have to. They settled in neighborhoods. Irish had their neighborhoods in New York and Philadelphia. The Italians ditto. But they wanted to become Americans. They learned English, and they became part of American culture, of which there is a distinct and unique American culture, which is rooted in Western civilization. That's what's different now. There's no interest in that. We don't even make a serious effort at assimilating. We're balkanizing. They use this term tribal, but we are balkanizing our population because modern arrivals don't all seek to become Americans. People trying to get on the legal immigration side, of course, are. But this mass illegal immigration has an entirely different purpose behind it, and political support is entirely different for it than for standard immigration. So what Trump is doing is simply, with his executive order, if he does this, will be reestablishing the Constitution, reasserting it. So, yeah, no, you're exactly right about that. So 2 calls, 2 great points. The guy from Pittsburgh who asked the question, he lives there, and he watches the news, and he's being blamed for the synagogue shooting. We've got to tone it down. We've got to come together. We've got to do this. We've got to do that. And if that's being said in the media, you know it's all aimed at Trump and his supporters. Appreciate the call again. Southampton in New York. Bill, you're next. Great to have you with us, sir. Hi.
Thank you, Rush, and thanks for all that you do for us.
Yes, you bet. Appreciate it.
You bet. With regard to the 14th Amendment, why not take it to the Supreme Court, or is that where this is going to end up eventually so that they can decide
it'll be there.
The language says?
It'll get there.
It'll get there, okay.
Yeah. It'll have to get there. Now, Senator Graham is going to offer legislation in the Senate. Look, we're way, way far away from this. We're just getting the conversation started here, which has to happen. There needs to be a pretty big re-education of the American population in general on the whole subject of immigration. And so Trump and his route of an executive order is good, but there's going to be a judge that's going to bring it to a screeching halt. Everybody knows that. I mean, that'll happen within hours of Trump signing the executive order. Everybody involved knows that's going to happen. That then begins the process. And it probably will end up at the Supreme Court unless Congress does write legislation. But in dealing with a constitutional amendment, it may take more than just a statutory act. And the left, and they've got plenty of judges out there, are going to be using every damn one of them to try to shut down every effort here. But see, this is how we end up having a chance to win, by shining the light on the left and who they are and what they do, by forcing them out of the shadows and making them do it. Sanctuary cities is a good educational tool. People can find exactly what these people are, the left, the people responsible for this, the people that are believing in sanctuary cities. Force them out. Make them defend it. Make them run for office, extolling the virtues of sanctuary cities. Make the left speak. Make them behave. Make them stand up and support what it is they believe in. And so this conversation starter on the 14th Amendment and ending birthright, make them stand up, and make Pelosi and Schumer and whoever the else of them make the case that anybody born in the United States should be make them make the case. That's how we're going to defeat them, folks. And it's going to be a long process. And don't forget, the left has gotten away for years by being able to lie and camouflage themselves and make themselves look like people they aren't and make themselves look like they support things they don't. There hasn't been anybody like Trump in elected Republican politics forcing the left out this way. And as it happens, the media goes more and more bonkers because they know what's going on. And it's forcing everybody to see that the media isn't the media. The media is the Democrat Party. And all of these things are why the people I talk to who think that there's not going to be a blue wave think it. They think more and more Americans, because of Trump, are finally seeing liberalism in action, as opposed to having been told what liberalism is and who liberals are. They're now seeing it. And once that happens, it's harder for the left to win. I mean, if they could win by being honest, if they could win by being who they are, they would have been doing that for a long, long time. I appreciate the call, Bill. Thank you much. We'll be back and continue after this. He makes a good point here. No one was granted birthright citizenship for nearly 100 years after the amendment was ratified. Again, the 14th Amendment ratified in 1868. It wasn't until nearly a century later that, a bunch of activist judges on the left decided that the 14th Amendment applied to anybody who happened to be born in the United States. And we have been living under that bastardization of the 14th Amendment since the 1960s. We have been living under the bastardization of a bunch of American culture since the 1960s, and it's come to a head, and this is the moment in time where finally there is a semblance of serious pushback. I mean, this is serious. Donald Trump is engaged in serious pushback, and this is what it looks like. This is not just rhetoric. Donald Trump is not somebody just talking. Even he himself said the other day, in his campaign rallies during the campaign, it was just words. We're going to make America great again. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But now he's got a track record. He's got the things that he has achieved and accomplished to point to. Not just words, but pushing back on all aspects of illegal immigration. Sanctuary cities to these caravans is going to be inflammable to the left as much as anything could be. The left is not about, look, I'm boring myself trying to explain liberalism to people. I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm just telling you, there's nothing, any illegitimate means to accomplish their objectives is perfectly fine with them. And we have to be ready to oppose them on that basis. The evidence, folks, that they refuse to accept the results of the election, that's what all of this is about. I mean, when you strip all of this down to its bare essence, it is the left and the Democrat Party and the media who have refused to accept the results of an election. And we don't have a lot of history of that. Both sides accepting the will of the people in elections has been the glue that has held the country together. That and a reverence for the Constitution. And now that they have refused to accept election results, for whatever reasons, is why we are where we are today. Speaking of the caravan, Trump sending 5,200 troops